The emergency beacon was dead. Again. Dr. Adrian Reyes threw the useless piece of salvaged electronics across his makeshift shelter with more force than was probably wise, watching it clatter against crystalline walls that sang in response to the impact. The sound was beautiful, a cascading chime that echoed through the crystal formations surrounding him, but Adrian was well past appreciating the acoustic properties of Vyx'thari 7. He'd been stranded on this moon for 3 days now. 3 days of rationing emergency supplies. 3 days of watching his oxygen reserves slowly deplete. 3 days of trying and failing to repair the distress beacon from his crashed escape pod. And 3 days of the growing realization that he was probably going to die here, alone on the most beautiful and utterly lifeless rock he'd ever had the misfortune to crash on. Adrian pulled up his pod's nav logs again, reviewing for the dozenth time how this disaster had happened. His research vessel, the Discovery's Child, had suffered what the automated systems had logged as catastrophic engine failure while conducting routine surveys of this sector. He'd barely made it to the escape pod before the ship tore itself apart in a cascade of explosions that still didn't make sense from an engineering perspective. The pod had made it to Vyx'thari 7, which the navigation charts marked with several warnings. Hazardous gravitational anomalies, magnetic interference, avoid unless emergency, and most ominously, restricted territory, unauthorized entry prohibited. Adrian had figured prohibited was better than dead in space, and had aimed for the moon's surface with what little control he had left. He'd crashed hard enough that his pod was now unsalvageable, just a twisted piece of metal half buried in crystal formations. But he'd survived, and that was what counted. Except now survival was looking increasingly unlikely. His emergency supplies would last maybe 4 more days. His environmental suit's life support was down to 36 hours of oxygen. And despite 3 days of searching, he'd found exactly 0 signs of anything that might help him repair his beacon or signal for rescue. The moon was beautiful in an eerie, unsettling way. Massive crystalline formations covered the surface, ranging from structures the size of his hand to towering spires that reached hundreds of meters into the thin atmosphere. They refracted the light from the system's distant star and the massive gas giant that Vyx'thari 7 orbited, creating light shows that would have been breathtaking under better circumstances. When the wind blew, and it blew constantly, the crystals sang. Each formation had its own pitch, its own resonance, and together they created harmonies that sounded almost like voices, almost like the moon itself was singing. But there was no life, no vegetation, no animals, no signs of civilization, just crystal and stone and that constant, haunting music. On his 4th day, desperate and running out of options, Adrian decided to explore further from his crash site than he dared before. His suit's power was nearly depleted, but if there was any chance of finding materials to repair his beacon or, miracle of miracles, some sign of intelligent life, he had to take it. He walked for hours, his boots crunching on crystalline sand, the singing of the formations growing louder as he moved through what felt like a forest of glass and gemstone. The gas giant was rising over the horizon, casting everything in shades of amber and purple, when Adrian saw something that made him stop in his tracks. Structures. Not natural crystal formations, but architecture. Buildings carved into and grown from the crystalline landscape, elegant and organic but unmistakably artificial. They were integrated so seamlessly with the natural formations that Adrian had to look twice to separate what was nature and what was construction. The designs were alien, curves and angles that didn't follow human architectural principles, but there was intentionality here. Purpose. Art, even. Adrian's heart, which had been sinking lower with each day of isolation, suddenly leapt with hope. Life, intelligent life. Maybe civilization, maybe rescue. He approached the nearest structure cautiously, calling out in universal standard. "Hello, is anyone here? I'm a human explorer. My ship crashed. I need help." No response except the singing of the crystals. Adrian moved closer, examining the building more carefully. It appeared to be carved from a single massive crystal formation, with openings that might be doors or windows, and surfaces that were too smooth and regular to be natural. "Please," he called again. "If anyone can hear me, I mean no harm. I'm just trying to survive. I need to repair my distress beacon or find a way to signal for rescue." Movement. Adrian's breath caught as he saw a figure in the shadows of one of the openings. Humanoid in general shape, 2 legs, 2 arms, upright posture, but clearly not human. The figure was wearing elaborate robes that seemed to shimmer and shift in the amber light, and their face was covered by a mask. The mask was striking, made of some translucent material that caught and refracted light in ways that made it difficult to look at directly, creating an almost dizzying effect. Colors shifted across its surface, never quite settling into anything stable. The figure stepped forward slightly, and Adrian heard a voice, definitely feminine, speaking accented but comprehensible universal standard. "You are trespassing, human. This moon is forbidden territory. How did you come to be here?" Adrian raised his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of non-aggression. "My research vessel suffered catastrophic failure. I crashed here 3 days ago. I had no idea this moon was inhabited or forbidden. My navigation data just marked it as hazardous, but didn't mention any inhabitants or restrictions." The masked figure was silent for a long moment, and Adrian got the impression he was being assessed, studied, judged. Finally, she spoke again. "I am Kelara of the Vyx'thari. Your presence here violates ancient protocols. These star paths are forbidden to outsiders, and this moon is sacred ground to my people." Adrian's heart sank. "I understand, and I'm truly sorry. I meant no disrespect. I was just trying to survive. If you can help me repair my distress beacon, I'll leave immediately and never return. I swear it." Another long silence. Then, unexpectedly, Kelara stepped fully out of the shadows. She was tall, taller than Adrian by at least 15 centimeters, with a build that suggested strength beneath the flowing robes. Her movements had a fluid grace that reminded him of dancers or martial artists. "Leaving you to die would violate deeper protocols than your trespass," she said finally. "The Vyx'thari do not kill through inaction when aid can be provided. I will help you repair your vessel's beacon. But you will speak of what you see here to no one, and you will never return to this region of space. Do you understand and agree?" Adrian agreed immediately. He was in no position to negotiate, and the alternative was dying slowly over the next few days. Relief flooded through him so intensely he felt dizzy. "Yes, absolutely yes, thank you." Kelara gestured for him to follow. "Come. You will need shelter, food, and water before we can begin repairs. The night here is cold, and your suit's environmental systems are nearly depleted." She wasn't wrong. Adrian followed her through the crystalline landscape to a larger structure carved into a massive formation. Inside, it was beautiful in an alien way. Rooms that flowed into each other with organic curves, lighting that seemed to come from the crystal itself, furniture that looked grown rather than built. Kelara provided him with water, cool and slightly mineral tasting, but his scanner confirmed it was safe, and food that looked like crystallized fruits and what might have been preserved proteins. His scanner approved those too, and Adrian ate gratefully, not realizing how hungry he'd been until food was in front of him. As he ate, Kelara examined the damaged beacon he'd brought with him, her gloved hands moving with practiced precision. "This is human technology, primitive by Vyx'thari standards but functional. The damage is extensive. I will need several days to fabricate replacement components." Adrian looked up, hope surging again. "You can actually repair it?" "I've been trying for 3 days and couldn't figure out how to bypass the damaged circuits." "Human circuit design is inefficient but comprehensible," Kelara said, and there might have been amusement in her tone. "I have studied many species' technologies. Yours is not particularly complex." She set the beacon aside. You will stay here while I work. Do not wander the sacred sites. Do not attempt to see behind my mask. Do not ask questions about my people that I do not volunteer to answer. If you violate these conditions, I will be forced to take actions neither of us would prefer." Adrian nodded quickly. "Understood, and thank you, truly. You're saving my life." Kelara was silent for a moment. Then quietly she said, "Perhaps, or perhaps I am merely delaying your death by making you witness what should remain hidden. We shall see which." And with that ominous statement, she left him alone in a guest area of her dwelling, returning to her work on his beacon, while Adrian tried to figure out what exactly he'd gotten himself into. Over the next several days, Adrian settled into a strange routine. Kelara worked on his beacon with methodical precision, fabricating components from materials Adrian didn't recognize, using technology he couldn't fully understand. She was clearly brilliant. Her understanding of engineering principles was sophisticated, and she adapted human design paradigms to work with Vyx'thari materials with creativity that impressed him. But she was also deeply private. She never removed her mask, even for a moment. Her robes covered her completely, gloves always on, not a centimeter of actual skin ever visible. She maintained careful distance between them, never allowing casual contact, and she deflected most of Adrian's questions about her people with polite but firm refusals to discuss. Adrian learned fragments anyway. The Vyx'thari were isolationists who had chosen to inhabit the dangerous, forbidden star paths, regions of space marked by gravitational anomalies and hazardous hyperspace routes that most species avoided. They had been spacefaring for thousands of years, but had deliberately withdrawn from contact with the broader galactic community. Why? Adrian asked one evening, as Kelara explained why she was testing a particular circuit configuration. Why stay isolated? The galaxy has room for everyone. There's no need to hide in dangerous regions. Kelara was silent for so long Adrian thought she wouldn't answer. Then, still focused on her work, she said quietly, "We do not hide from lack of space. We hide from judgment." "Judgment about what?" "About what we are." Her hands stilled on the beacon. "My people's appearance disturbs others. We learned this truth millennia ago when we first encountered other spacefaring species. Every civilization we met reacted to our true forms with fear, revulsion, horror. They called us demons, abominations. Wrong." Adrian felt his chest tighten at the pain he heard beneath her controlled words. "That's terrible. I'm sorry that happened to your people." "Sorry is insufficient," Kelara said, "but it is also irrelevant. We made a choice. Continue enduring the fear and rejection of species too limited to see past our appearance, or withdraw to regions where we would not be disturbed. We chose withdrawal. It has served us well for 3,000 years. "But surely not every species reacted that way," Adrian protested. "There must have been some who—" "Every single species," Kelara interrupted, and there was finality in her tone. "Without exception. We documented our encounters carefully. Every first contact ended the same way, with other species recoiling from us, calling us monsters, demanding we leave or threatening violence if we did not." She returned to her work, and the set of her shoulders made it clear the conversation was over. Adrian wanted to argue more, wanted to insist that surely there were species who could have looked past appearance to see the intelligent, cultured people beneath. But he was a guest depending on her generosity, and pushing past her boundaries seemed like a good way to jeopardize that. The days continued. Adrian helped where he could with the beacon repairs, following Kelara's instructions and learning bits about Vyx'thari engineering principles. She was a patient teacher when discussing technical matters, explaining concepts with clarity even when they violated his human assumptions about how things should work. But personal questions remained off-limits. Adrian learned nothing about Vyx'thari culture beyond what Kelara chose to share. He never saw another member of her species. If there were others on this moon, they remained carefully hidden. and he never saw any part of Kelara herself beyond the masked face and robed body she presented. On his 7th day on Veros 7, a violent storm rolled across the moon. It wasn't weather in the terrestrial sense. The moon's atmosphere was too thin for that. But electromagnetic activity from the gas giant created storms of charged particles that set the crystalline formations singing with increased intensity and made the entire landscape glow with aurora-like light. Kelara had explained the phenomenon earlier, warning Adrian that when storms came, they needed to shelter in her dwelling's shielded core, a room deep within the crystal structure where the electromagnetic fields couldn't penetrate. When the alarm sounded, a resonance from the crystals themselves, both Adrian and Kelara moved quickly to secure the dwelling. They were closing the final shields when a panel began to come loose, caught by the increasing electromagnetic field and starting to tear free. Kelara reached for it, trying to secure it before it could damage other systems. The surge hit at exactly the wrong moment. Energy arced through the dwelling's outer structure, following conductive pathways that should have been grounded but somehow weren't. The blast caught Kelara directly, throwing her backward with force that made Adrian cry out. She hit a crystalline wall hard, and he heard something crack, either the crystal or something else, he couldn't tell. Adrian rushed to her immediately, his medical training overriding everything else. She was conscious but dazed, her breathing labored, and there was visible damage to her robes where the energy had scorched them. "Don't," Kelara managed, trying to push him away with hands that shook. "Don't look, please, the protocols." "You're injured," Adrian interrupted, his voice firm despite his fear. "I need to assess the damage. I'm a xenobiologist. I have medical training. Let me help you." Kelara tried to protest more, but she was clearly hurt and disoriented. Adrian carefully helped her move away from the damaged wall, supporting her weight and trying to assess her injuries without causing more harm. The damage to her robes made this difficult. The fabric was scorched and torn in places, and beneath it he could see what looked like actual wounds, places where the energy had burned through clothing to underlying tissue. "I need to see the injury," Adrian said gently but firmly. "I need to determine if it's serious. Please let me help you." Kelara made a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh or both. "You will see me. You will see what we are, and then you will understand why we hide." "I don't care what you look like," Adrian said. "I care that you're hurt and I need to treat you before the injuries get worse." With trembling hands, whether from pain or fear, Adrian couldn't tell, Kelara allowed him to carefully remove the damaged sections of her robe to access the wound on her side. And as the fabric fell away, Adrian saw what she'd been hiding. Her skin wasn't skin in the human sense. It was luminous, covered in intricate fractal patterns that seemed to shift and move as he watched. The patterns glowed softly from within, creating designs that looked like living constellations mapped across her body. The colors weren't anything Adrian had seen before, not quite bioluminescence, not quite crystalline refraction, something in between that defied easy categorization. The wound itself was bleeding something that looked like liquid light, not blood, or at least not blood in any sense Adrian's medical training had prepared him for. It was viscous and opalescent, and where it touched her luminescent skin, the fractal patterns seemed to flicker and dim. Adrian stared, his medical assessment momentarily forgotten in the face of something so utterly alien and utterly beautiful that his brain couldn't quite process it. "My face," Kelara whispered, and Adrian realized her mask was cracking, damaged by the impact or the energy surge. Pieces were falling away, revealing what lay beneath. "You must not see my face. The protocols exist for a reason. No outsider has ever seen a Vyx'thari's true face and lived." Lived. Adrian managed, his attention split between the injured side he needed to treat and the fracturing mask. "Are you saying your people kill witnesses?" "No," Kelara said, and there was anguish in her voice. "We erase their memories. We remove all record of the encounter. We cannot bear to be seen and rejected, so we ensure no one remembers seeing us. It is our greatest shame and our greatest protection. The mask fractured further, larger pieces falling away, and Adrian found himself looking at Kelara's true face. And he froze, not in horror, in breathtaking, overwhelming awe. Kelara's face was like nothing human imagination could have prepared for. Where humans had relatively smooth skin with subtle textures, Kelara had something that looked like living mathematics, fractal patterns that branched and recurved across her features in designs that followed principles Adrian recognized from his studies of mathematical beauty, but had never seen expressed in biological form. The patterns glowed from within, creating the impression that her face was lit from behind by some internal star. The luminescence shifted through colors as he watched, gold bleeding into silver, silver into deep blue, blue into purple, in transitions that seemed to respond to her emotional state, though Adrian couldn't yet read the code. Her eyes, if he could call them eyes, were crystalline structures that caught and refracted light in ways that created depth beyond depth. Looking into them was like looking into space itself, into nebulae and star clusters and galactic formations. They weren't just beautiful, they were sublime, touching something in Adrian's perception that went beyond aesthetic appreciation into something almost spiritual. Her features were angular and precise, following geometric principles that made her face simultaneously alien and somehow mathematically perfect. Every curve followed golden ratios. Every angle created harmonies with its neighbors, as if her entire face was designed according to some cosmic blueprint for beauty that humans had only glimpsed in their art and architecture. When she moved slightly, a reflexive flinch from pain, the patterns shifted, creating the illusion that her entire face was in constant, subtle motion, like watching stars move across the night sky in time-lapse, like observing the birth of galaxies, like seeing mathematics made flesh in ways that were simultaneously precise and organic, rigid and flowing, alien and somehow fundamentally right. Adrian realized he was staring, his hands frozen in the act of reaching for his medical kit. He'd completely forgotten about treating her wound, lost in the overwhelming visual experience of seeing her unveiled face. Kelara had gone very still. Through her crystalline eyes, he could see what he interpreted as fear, resignation, the preparation for inevitable rejection that her entire culture had conditioned her to expect. "My face is terrifying," she whispered, and the words carried 3,000 years of cultural shame, of internalized horror at her own appearance, of accepting as truth what every other species had told her people. "I understand your reaction. You need not say anything. I will begin the memory erasure process once you have treated my wound. You will remember nothing of this encounter, nothing of me, nothing of what you have seen. It is better that way. It is always better that way." "No," Adrian said, and his voice came out rough with emotion he couldn't fully identify. Awe, certainly, but also anger, anger at species that had looked at something as extraordinary as Kelara and seen only their own limitations reflected back. Kelara's patterns flickered, uncertainty replacing resignation. "What?" "No," Adrian repeated, finally finding words adequate to what he was seeing. "Kelara, you're not terrifying, you're—" He gestured helplessly at her face, trying to articulate an aesthetic experience that transcended his normal vocabulary. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, the most beautiful in the galaxy." Complete stillness. Every pattern on Kelara's face froze mid-transition. "You mock me," she said, but there was uncertainty in her voice now rather than conviction. "No species has ever found us beautiful. They find us wrong, uncanny, disturbing. Our features do not follow biological patterns other species recognize as alive. We are too mathematical, too geometric, too extraordinary," Adrian interrupted, finally returning to his medical work but unable to stop glancing at her face. "Kelara, I've spent my entire career studying alien biology. I've cataloged hundreds of species. I've seen every kind of evolutionary adaptation and biological beauty the galaxy offers. He carefully cleaned the wound on her side, noting how the liquid light was already beginning to clot in ways that suggested advanced healing capabilities. And none are as striking as you. Your people aren't disturbing. You're living proof that beauty can take forms we never imagined. He looked up from his work to meet her crystalline eyes directly. Every species develops aesthetic preferences based on their evolutionary history, right? Humans find certain proportions and symmetries pleasing because they indicated health and genetic fitness in our ancestors. But we also have the capacity to recognize beauty in things completely outside those parameters. We find nebulae beautiful, we find crystalline structures beautiful, we find mathematical patterns beautiful. Adrian gestured at her face. You're all of those things combined with consciousness and life. You're what would happen if someone took the most beautiful equations, the most sublime cosmic phenomena, the most perfect geometric principles, and somehow made them into a living being. You're not horrifying. You're magnificent. Kelara's patterns had begun moving again, cycling through colors more rapidly than before, golds and silvers and blues flickering across her features in what Adrian was beginning to recognize as intense emotional response. You truly mean this, she said, and it wasn't quite a question. You're not fabricating words to ease the situation. You genuinely do not find me horrifying. I find you breathtaking, Adrian said simply, returning to treating her wound. I understand now why you wear the mask, not because you're terrifying, but because other species' reactions to you made you believe you were. But they were wrong, Kelara, completely, utterly wrong. He finished applying the biological sealant his kit provided, not ideal for her physiology but better than nothing, and sat back. How long have your people been hiding? 3,000 years, Kelara said quietly. Since we first encountered other spacefaring civilizations and saw their reactions, we tried for centuries to establish contact, to join the galactic community. We believed that if we demonstrated our intelligence, our technology, our peaceful intentions, others would look past our appearance. Her crystalline eyes dimmed slightly. We were wrong. Every species we encountered reacted with fear or revulsion. They called us the fractal demons, the pattern plague, the wrong ones. They said our faces were impossible, unnatural, things that should not exist. Some attacked us, others fled. None welcomed us. Adrian felt fury on her behalf, fury at species who'd been too limited by their own evolutionary aesthetics to recognize beauty in forms that didn't match their preconceptions. They were fools. They looked at you through the narrow lens of their own biology and couldn't see past it to what you actually are. And what are we? Kelara asked. Living art, Adrian said without hesitation. Conscious beauty. People whose evolutionary path led you to develop features that humans would spend centuries trying to capture in mathematics and art, and never quite succeed, because we lack the biological capacity to embody fractals and luminescence the way you do. He met her eyes again. You asked what you are. You're proof that the universe can create beauty in forms we never predicted, that challenge our assumptions about what beauty can be. You're what happens when mathematics and biology merge perfectly. You're extraordinary, Kelara, and your people have been hiding that extraordinariness from the galaxy for 3,000 years because other species were too stupid to see it. Kelara raised one ungloved hand to her bare face. Adrian noticed her hands showed the same fractal patterns as her features, the same shifting luminescence, touching her features as if she'd forgotten what they felt like without the mask covering them. No one has ever said such things to me, she whispered. To any of my people, not in 3,000 years of isolation. Then your people have been hiding from the wrong species, Adrian said. Or maybe humans are just different enough in how we perceive beauty that we can appreciate what others missed. They sat in silence while the electromagnetic storm raged outside, the crystal formations singing with increased intensity, creating harmonies that made the dwelling's walls resonate with complex frequencies. Finally, Kelara spoke again, her voice stronger now. "You should rest. You sustained minor injuries in your crash that are not fully healed, and your human physiology requires more sleep than mine. The storm will continue for several hours." Adrian wanted to protest that they should continue talking, that there was so much more he wanted to understand about her people, and why they believed themselves to be horrifying when they were anything but. But he was exhausted. The adrenaline of the storm and seeing Kelara injured was wearing off, and his body was reminding him that he'd been surviving on emergency rations and stress for over a week. Kelara showed him to a sleeping area, a alcove carved into crystal with padding that looked organic but felt comfortable to his human sensory preferences. As he settled in, his last sight before sleep claimed him was Kelara sitting by the window, her bare face reflecting the storm's light in patterns that looked like living constellations dancing across her features. And he thought, with the fuzzy logic of someone drifting into sleep, that the galaxy had been immeasurably poorer for the Vyx'thari's 3,000-year absence, that whatever species had made them feel they needed to hide should be ashamed. That beauty came in forms evolution could barely predict and culture struggled to recognize. That sometimes the most important thing you could do was see someone, really see them, and tell them the truth about what you saw, even if that truth contradicted 3 millennia of cultural shame and isolation, even if it challenged everything they'd come to believe about themselves, especially then. Adrian woke to find Kelara standing over him, her face still bare of its mask, her fractal patterns shifting through colors he was learning to associate with thoughtfulness. For a moment he wondered if she'd changed her mind about the memory erasure, if she'd decided that his seeing her true face was too dangerous to her people's isolation. But instead, she simply said, "Your beacon is fully repaired. The storm has passed. You can leave Veros 7 now if you wish." There was something in her tone, not quite hope, not quite regret, something complex that her alien features made difficult for him to fully interpret. Adrian sat up carefully, his body still aching from the crash but functional. "If I wish, I thought you were going to insist I leave immediately now that the repairs are done." "You have seen me," Kelara said quietly. "You have violated every protocol my people maintain. By our laws, I should either erase your memory of this encounter or report your presence to the Guardians, who would ensure you never spoke of what you witnessed." She paused, her patterns shifting through golds and deep blues. "But you called me beautiful. You looked at my true face, the face that has driven 3,000 years of isolation, and you saw not horror but—" She seemed to struggle for words. "You saw what we have never allowed ourselves to hope anyone might see." She turned to look out the window at the crystal landscape, now calm after the storm's passage. "And I find I am curious, Adrian of the humans, curious whether you truly meant what you said, or if it was merely kindness spoken to ease a difficult situation. Curious whether other humans might see as you did. Curious whether 3,000 years of hiding was based on universal truth, or merely on the limited perspectives of species we encountered in our early explorations." Adrian stood, moving to stand near her but respecting the distance she seemed to need. "I meant every word. And yes, I think other humans would see what I see. We appreciate beauty in mathematics, in patterns, in things that are precise and geometric. Your features embody all of that. You're not horrifying, Kelara. You never were." "Then help me understand," Kelara said, turning to face him fully. "Explain why humans would see beauty where every other species we encountered saw monsters. What is different about your people that you can look at us and not recoil?" Adrian thought carefully about how to explain. "I think it's partially evolutionary and partially cultural. Humans developed aesthetic preferences for certain facial proportions. Yes, symmetry, particular spacing of features, things that indicated health. But we also developed the ability to recognize beauty in abstract forms. We find fractals beautiful even though they don't occur naturally in our evolutionary environment. We find bioluminescence stunning even though humans don't produce it. We appreciate geometric precision, even though organic life on Earth tends toward irregular forms. He gestured at her face. You combine all of those things. Your features are mathematically precise in ways humans spend centuries trying to replicate in art. Your luminescence is unlike anything biological on Earth, which makes it exotic and fascinating, rather than familiar and boring. Your fractal patterns follow principles we recognize as beautiful from mathematics, even though we've never seen them expressed in living tissue before. But other species have mathematics, Kelara pointed out. Other species appreciate patterns. Why would humans alone see beauty in what we are? I don't think we're alone, Adrian said. I think the species you encountered 3,000 years ago were limited by their own evolutionary aesthetics, by features that their development had coded as correct for living faces. You violated those expectations so completely that they couldn't process you as beautiful. You were too far outside their parameters. He moved closer, still respecting her space but wanting her to see his sincerity. But humans have always been good at seeing beauty in things that are completely outside our evolutionary experience. We find alien sunsets beautiful, even though they bear no resemblance to Earth's sky. We find crystalline structures stunning, even though they're nothing like organic life. We appreciate art that violates every natural proportion because it creates interesting patterns. So you're saying humans are more flexible in aesthetic appreciation, Kelara said slowly. I'm saying humans don't automatically equate different from our evolutionary template with horrifying, Adrian clarified. We're curious about difference. We find exotic forms interesting rather than automatically threatening. And your people are so different from any biological form. Humans have evolved to recognize that we don't have the same visceral rejection response species that are more similar to you might have had. He met her crystalline eyes. To us, you're not uncanny valley. You're so far outside our normal parameters that our brains process you as exotic and fascinating rather than wrong. You're like discovering a completely new primary color. Not red or blue or green, but something we didn't even know was possible. That's not horrifying. That's extraordinary. Kelara was silent for a long time, her pattern cycling through colors Adrian was beginning to recognize as complex thought. You're asking me to believe that 3,000 years of my people's experience was based on unfortunate encounters with species whose aesthetic frameworks were too narrow. That there might be others out there, humans certainly, perhaps others, who could see us differently. I'm asking you to consider the possibility, Adrian said. You're basing your entire civilization's isolation on data from 3,000 years ago. Species change. Cultures evolve. Maybe the galaxy is ready to see you differently now. Or maybe humans were always ready but you never encountered us before. This is a dangerous hypothesis, Kelara said. If you're wrong, if humans generally respond to us with the same horror other species showed, then I will have exposed my people to rejection for nothing. I will have broken millennia of protective isolation for the false hope created by one human's unusual aesthetic preferences. Then let me prove it, Adrian offered. Let me return to human space with images of you. Let me show your face to xenobiologists, to artists, to regular people. Let me gauge reactions before you risk your people's exposure. If I'm wrong, if humans generally respond with horror, then you maintain your isolation and nothing changes. But if I'm right. He trailed off, hoping she would finish the thought. And she did. If you're right, then 3,000 years of hiding was unnecessary. Then my people have been suffering isolation and shame based on a misunderstanding. Then we could emerge from the forbidden star paths and participate in galactic civilization rather than hiding from it. Her patterns shifted to something that might have been hope. That is either the most generous offer I have ever received, or the most dangerous risk I have ever been asked to take, possibly both. The debate continued over the next several days. Adrian argued passionately that her people deserved the chance to be seen, to participate in the galaxy, to stop hiding from a judgment that might not be as universal as they believed. Kelara countered with the weight of 3,000 years of cultural trauma, with the fear that exposure would lead only to more rejection, with the concern that abandoning their isolation might destroy cultural foundations that had sustained them through millennia. During one particularly intense discussion, something happened that changed the dynamic entirely. A Vyx'thari patrol vessel landed near Kelara's dwelling. 3 more Vyx'thari emerged, all wearing the elaborate masks and robes characteristic of their people. They entered Kelara's dwelling with purpose, and Adrian felt immediate tension. The lead figure, clearly male based on body shape, taller than Kelara and wearing robes that marked him as high-ranking, spoke in the Vyx'thari language. Adrian's translator implant struggled with the rapid, complex speech, but managed to render the general meaning. Kelara, the sensors detected electromagnetic storm activity, and we came to verify your safety. But there is an outsider present, and you are. The speaker stopped, apparently noticing that Kelara's face was completely bare. You are unmasked. In the presence of an alien, what have you done? Kelara stood straighter, her patterns brightening with what Adrian was learning to recognize as determination. He has seen me, Vyx'thari. He has seen my true face, and he called me beautiful. The silence that followed was profound. All 3 of the newly arrived Vyx'thari were absolutely still, and even through their masks Adrian could sense their shock. That is impossible, Vyx'thari finally said. No outsider has ever reacted to our true forms with anything but fear. He lies to manipulate you. He does not lie, Kelara said firmly. I have observed him carefully. His reaction was genuine shock followed by what I can only describe as awe. He sees beauty in what we are, Vyx'thari, which means the universal rejection we have based our entire society around avoiding may not be as universal as we believed. She turned to address all 3 visitors. What if we were wrong? What if we withdrew based on encounters with species whose aesthetic frameworks couldn't accommodate us? But there are others, humans certainly, perhaps more, who could see us differently. What if 3,000 years of isolation has been based on incomplete data? The debate that followed was intense, and mostly conducted in rapid Vyx'thari that Adrian's implant couldn't keep up with. But the emotional content was clear from the patterns he could see through the visitors' robes, colors shifting between the red of anger or fear, the blue of skepticism, and occasionally the gold that seemed to indicate hope or interest. Eventually, Vyx'thari switched back to Universal Standard, addressing Adrian directly. Human, you claim to find our appearance beautiful. This contradicts 3,000 years of documented encounters with every other spacefaring species. Why should we believe your reaction is genuine and not merely diplomatic courtesy or calculated manipulation? Adrian met the masked gaze steadily. Because I'm a xenobiologist. I've dedicated my career to studying and appreciating the diversity of alien life. I find Kelara's features extraordinary because they combine mathematical precision with biological complexity in ways I've never seen before. She's like looking at living fractals at conscious geometry. That's not horrifying, that's fascinating. That's beautiful in ways that challenge and expand my understanding of what beauty can be. One of the other visitors spoke, a female voice. But you are one human. Your individual reaction, however genuine, does not indicate how your species generally would respond. Then let me find out, Adrian proposed. Let me return to human space with recordings of Kelara's appearance. Let me show her face to xenobiologists, to artists, to ordinary people. Let me document their reactions. If they respond with horror, then your isolation was justified and you continue as you have been. But if they respond as I did, then we have been hiding from a judgment that was never as universal as we believed, Kelara finished. Then we have suffered 3,000 years of unnecessary isolation. She looked at Vyx'thari. I propose we allow this experiment. The human returns to his people with evidence of what we are. If reactions are positive, or even neutral rather than horrified, we bring the question to the full council. If reactions are negative, we erase the evidence and maintain our isolation as we always have. Vyx'thari was clearly uncomfortable. You risk everything on this human's hypothesis. Our isolation has protected us for millennia. To abandon it based on one person's unusual aesthetic preferences is taking a chance on hope rather than accepting fear forever, Kelara interrupted. Vyx'thari, I have spent my entire life accepting that my face is horrifying because that is what our entire culture agrees is true. And then one human looked at me and saw beauty. Just one. But if one person can see us differently, perhaps others can too. Is that not worth exploring? The debate continued, but gradually Adrian saw the patterns of the visitors shift toward agreement. They would allow Kelara's proposed experiment. Adrian would return to human space with recordings and images. If human reactions were positive, the Vyx'thari Council would consider allowing limited contact with the outside galaxy. If negative, they would maintain isolation and erase all evidence of the encounter. Adrian was given his repaired beacon and escorted to his damaged pod, which the Vyx'thari helped him modify enough to reach the nearest human outpost. But before he left, Kelara approached him one final time, her face still bare, her fractal patterns glowing in the light of the rising gas giant. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for seeing me, for calling me beautiful when I have spent my entire life believing I was horrifying. Whatever comes of this experiment, you have given me something I did not know is one of the most remarkable examples of biological beauty I've ever encountered. The fractal geometry alone, the complexity required to maintain those patterns across living tissue, this represents evolutionary development we didn't know was possible." She looked at him directly. "You said they believe they're horrifying. They're magnificent." The reaction from other review board members was similarly positive. The cultural specialist noted the tragic irony of a species hiding for millennia because they'd encountered species too limited to appreciate their unique beauty. The diplomatic advisor immediately began drafting protocols for potential contact. Within days, news of Adrian's encounter with the Vyx'thari spread through human space. Not classified, as Adrian had feared it might be, but shared as an extraordinary discovery. And the response was overwhelmingly positive. Artists were inspired by the Vyx'thari's mathematical beauty, creating works that tried to capture the living fractal patterns Adrian had witnessed. Scientists were fascinated by the biological mechanisms that could produce such features. The general public was captivated by the romantic tragedy of a species hiding, because they believed themselves to be monsters when they were actually stunning. Human news feeds filled with discussions and debates. Art galleries displayed Adrian's recordings. Xenobiologists published papers. And the overwhelming consensus, from experts and laypeople alike, was that the Vyx'thari were not horrifying. They were extraordinary, beautiful in ways that challenged and expanded human concepts of what beauty could be. Adrian compiled all of this, the recordings of reactions, the artistic responses, the scientific papers, the public opinion data, into a comprehensive report. Then, using the coordinates Kelara had provided, he transmitted everything to Vyx'thari 7 with a simple message. "I was right. Humanity sees you as I do. Please don't hide anymore." The response came 3 weeks later. An invitation to return to Vyx'thari 7, this time with a small delegation of humans who'd expressed interest in meeting the Vyx'thari, and a note from Kelara herself. "You have changed my world with your words. Come back. Let us see if your people's reactions in person match their responses to recordings. If they do, we emerge from 3,000 years of darkness. If they don't, at least we tried." When Adrian returned to Vyx'thari 7 with Dr. Chen, the artist Marcus Wells, and Ambassador Liu, he found something unprecedented. A Vyx'thari welcoming committee standing outside, completely unmasked. Kelara was among them, her fractal patterns glowing with colors Adrian had learned to interpret as hope and nervous excitement. Marcus, the artist, gasped audibly when he saw them. "Oh my God, Adrian, the recordings didn't do them justice. They're like someone took the most beautiful mathematical equations and made them breathe. This is incredible." Doctor Chen was already taking readings, her scientific mind cataloging data, even as she clearly fought to simply appreciate the aesthetic experience. The bioluminescence is even more complex than the recording suggested. And the patterns, they're responsive, aren't they? Shifting based on emotional state. This is such sophisticated biological engineering or remarkable evolutionary adaptation. Ambassador Liu, ever practical, simply said, "They're beautiful, genuinely beautiful. And the fact that they've been hiding because they thought they were horrifying is one of the saddest things I've ever heard." The humans were led to a large structure where the Vyx'thari Council had assembled. Adrian saw dozens of Vyx'thari, all unmasked now, their collective patterns creating a visual symphony of light and mathematics that made even Dr. Chen forget her scientific detachment long enough to simply stare in awe. Vainath, the guardian Adrian had met before, addressed them formally. His patterns were cycling through colors Adrian couldn't fully interpret, hope mixed with fear, perhaps, or anticipation mixed with old shame. "We have reviewed the evidence your species provided, the reactions to our appearance, the artistic responses, the scientific fascination, the complete absence of horror or revulsion. And we are forced to confront a truth we have been avoiding for 3,000 years. He paused, and his voice carried emotion even through his formal tone. "We believed ourselves to be universally horrifying. We built our entire civilization around that belief, around protecting ourselves from the pain of rejection by hiding from all contact. We told ourselves that our appearance was objectively disturbing, that any species capable of spaceflight would react to us with fear." His patterns shifted to something that might have been sorrow or regret. "We were wrong. Not just wrong, but catastrophically wrong. We withdrew from the galaxy based on encounters with species whose evolutionary aesthetics were too narrow to appreciate forms of beauty outside their parameters. We spent 3 millennia in isolation, missing out on galactic civilization, telling ourselves it was necessary when it was really just fear." Another council member spoke, a female whose patterns glowed in deeper blues and purples. "This has created intense debate within our society. Some argue that humans are an anomaly, that most species will still find us disturbing. Others argue that even if only humans appreciate us, that alone is enough to justify emerging from isolation. Still others argue that we should remain hidden regardless, that our isolation has become part of our identity, and abandoning it would destroy who we are." Kelara stepped forward then, and Adrian saw that her patterns were brighter than he'd ever seen them, cycling through golds and silvers and colors he didn't have names for. "I have advocated strongly for emergence, not because I believe it will be easy or that all species will see us as Adrian did, but because hiding from potential rejection is allowing fear to control our entire civilization. Because we deserve the chance to participate in the galaxy, to share our knowledge and culture, to exist openly rather than in perpetual shadow." She looked directly at Adrian. One human saw beauty where 3,000 years of encounters with other species saw only horror. That alone tells me we were wrong to base our isolation on those early encounters. If one person can see past their evolutionary programming to appreciate what we actually are, then there must be others. Humans certainly, but perhaps more species than we ever imagined. She turned to address her entire council. "I propose we end 3,000 years of isolation. Begin cautiously, initially only with humans who have demonstrated positive reactions, but allow ourselves to be seen, to participate in galactic culture, to share what we are rather than hiding it. Stop erasing memories and start building relationships. Stop living in fear and start living in hope." The debate that followed was complex and involved the full council. Arguments for and against emergence were presented with passion and logic. But eventually, with Kelara's advocacy and the overwhelming evidence from human reactions, a decision was reached. The Vyx'thari would emerge from isolation. They would begin limited contact, initially focused on humans but potentially expanding to other species. They would allow themselves to be seen, documented, known. They would participate in galactic civilization rather than hiding from it. They would stop believing themselves to be horrifying and start recognizing that beauty takes forms evolution could barely predict. The decision was announced to the broader Vyx'thari population over the following days. Reactions ranged from excited hope to terrified resistance. But there was also relief. Relief that they didn't have to hide anymore. Relief that at least one species saw them as beautiful. Relief that 3,000 years of isolation might finally be ending. Adrian spent 2 more weeks on Veros 7, helping facilitate the initial stages of cultural exchange. He worked most closely with Kelara, who had been appointed as her people's first ambassador to human space. One evening, standing together and watching the gas giant rise over the crystal fields, Kelara spoke quietly. "You changed my entire civilization with 6 words. You're the most beautiful in the galaxy. No one has ever said such things to any of my people in 3,000 years, and those words have given us courage we had forgotten we possessed." Adrian felt the weight of that, the responsibility of having sparked something so enormous. "I just told you the truth. You are beautiful, all of your people are. The galaxy was poorer for your absence." Kelara's patterns cycled through warm golds. "I have been thinking about what comes next. My people are emerging from isolation, but we will need guides, advocates, people who understand both Vyx'thari culture and the broader galaxy, people who can help other species learn to see us as you did." She turned to face him fully. "I have been appointed as our first ambassador to human worlds. I will be leaving Veros 7, traveling to Earth and other human colonies, building relationships and demonstrating that we are not the demons of legend. And I would like you to accompany me, not as my keeper or handler, but as my partner in this endeavor." She paused, her crystalline eyes reflecting starlight. "You saw me first when I believed I was horrifying. You called me beautiful first when I thought that word could never apply to my people. Will you help me show others what you saw? Will you help my people emerge from 3,000 years of darkness?" Adrian didn't hesitate. "Yes. Absolutely yes. I would be honored to help your people reclaim their place in the galaxy." 3 months later, Kelara arrived on Earth as the first Vyx'thari ambassador to officially visit a human world in recorded history. Adrian was with her as she stepped out before crowds of humans gathered to witness the historic moment. There were gasps as people saw her unmasked face for the first time in person, the fractal patterns shifting across her features, the crystalline eyes reflecting light in impossible ways, the living mathematics of her beauty. But the gasps weren't horror, they were awe. Children pointed with excitement rather than fear. Artists sketched frantically, trying to capture what they were seeing. Scientists took readings with expressions of wonder. And Kelara, standing before thousands of humans with her face bare and vulnerable, realized with profound relief that Adrian had been right all along. She wasn't horrifying. She never had been. Her people had been hiding from species too limited to appreciate beauty that didn't match their evolutionary templates. But humanity saw them. Humanity appreciated them. And that was enough to begin the long process of emerging from isolation, of reclaiming their place in galactic civilization, of teaching other species to expand their definitions of beauty. The revolution had begun, all because one human explorer, stranded